Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mind Matters, empowering conversations for public safety professionals, where we'll discuss topics involving wellness and first responders. Join me on this journey of learning from subject matter experts in their various fields of psychology, medicine, leadership, and many more. You can find our show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Let's get into the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Morris. Welcome back to Mind Matters, a podcast where we explore the human side of public safety, leadership, wellness, and the moments that shape both careers and communities. I'm your host, Elizabeth Morris.
And I'm Gary Fly. And in each episode, we have the opportunity to sit down with leaders who are influencing the profession in a meaningful way. And today's conversation is one we've really been looking for.
Yes, absolutely. Today, we're joined by Chief Christy Wentzell. Did I say it correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Of the Brevard Police Department here in North Carolina. So she brings more than 25 years of law enforcement experience serving in agencies across the Southeast. And that includes Georgia and Tennessee and North Carolina. Her career has included work in community corrections, investigative leadership, and public safety administration, including serving as commander over the Criminal Investigations Division at Apex Police Department before becoming chief in Brevard. So in Brevard, she made history as the first female police chief in the department. Congratulations. And she continues to lead with strong focus on employee development, leadership, coaching, and community engagement. And she's also active in the broader profession, serving as representative with the National Association of Women Law Enforcement Executives, participating on the Law Enforcement Torch Run Executive Council, and helping lead Brevard's CALIA accreditation efforts. Beyond the badge, Chief and her husband Charles, a retired U.S. Special Forces Master Sergeant, have built a life centered around service and compassion, and together they've raised 3 children and have fostered children with disabilities, and reflecting their deep commitment to supporting others both inside and outside the profession. So, Chief, we're really honored to have you here with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
And happy St. Patty's Day.
Yes. Same to you.
So I think we're going to start really with sort of the leadership journey, Chief. And after hearing Elizabeth walk through your background, one thing that stands out is the range of environments you've worked throughout your career. So let's start at the beginning if we can.
So I started my career, I originally wanted to be a teacher. And I lasted one day of student teaching and said, this is probably not the profession for me. And so luckily I had a mentor at the time while in college that said, given your personality, given everything that I know about you, I think you'd be a great fit for law enforcement and you should do a ride along. So I did my first ride along in Gwinnett County, Georgia. And from the moment I sat in the patrol car as a 19-year-old kid, I fell in love with this profession. Henry County, Georgia, when I turned 21, I dropped 5 applications around Metro Atlanta, and Henry County hired me first. And so I started the academy, worked there, started out as general patrol, moved to narcotics where I worked undercover for several years. I had a chance to help the department get its state accreditation. So that was a unique experience. And then I took on supervisory roles. I was a sergeant in patrol, lieutenant in patrol, as well as CID, criminal investigations, and stayed in Henry County for just at 14 years. Met my husband, and he's, of course, being in the military, active duty at the time. We relocated to just north of Nashville, Tennessee, in a city called Clarksville, near Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And from there, I was kind of, again, taking a detour as being a military spouse from my career, and I took a position as a program director for community corrections, which was such an eye-opening experience for me, seeing the other side of the criminal justice system. And I did that for approximately 2 years until the military said we were moving again. And given his deployment schedule, I went back home to Lilburn as a captain over operations until we got back stabilized in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I worked for the Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission. Finally, he decided to retire, and Apex had a criminal investigations position open as over CID. which I followed that route, and that set me up for the position that I currently have today as the Brevard Chief of Police.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what did that path look like to becoming the chief? But you explained that, and you really did. You've been a part of about every jurisdiction and unit, almost, making up many agencies across multiple states.
And at times it was hard as a military spouse, and I would get frustrated and feel almost, I would tell him a couple times a little bit of resentment having to start a career again and again. But it really gave me the opportunity to see so many different aspects. I have familiarity now with ABC laws that are very similar to ALE here in North Carolina and have that experience that I can bring to the table. Corrections was amazing as far as perspective. And really, each different agency gave me a tool for my toolbox that has made me the chief that I am today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. So you said that really the way I heard you say this is that role in Apex really sort of positioned you for this current role. I'm curious what those attributes of that were, or why. What makes you come to that conclusion?
So, first and foremost, Apex, under Chief Armstrong at the time, he was the chief that hired me. I was hired back in at a command level. So I left Henry County as a lieutenant. I worked as a program director. I was a captain in Lilburn. And then moving back to Tennessee, I was just a special agent. And so, but he saw the value in my experience and brought me back at a command level that put me in a position to where, in terms of what departments are looking for in a chief, I was at that command level. And so I kind of say that was like my big break, getting back into the career and being able to set me up for a chief's position.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. The idea that you started life with the idea of being a teacher and then went into law enforcement is so intriguing to me. But I hear, in the background with the fostering of children with disabilities, the help with the accreditation, which you've done now a couple times. It sounds like it feels like there's that thread of empathy and a desire to help people learn and whatnot through those different experiences, even though they seem very disparate.
Yes, sir. And it's funny to say it now because I wanted to start as a teacher, and I feel more almost as a teacher and a mentor and a guidance counselor some at times. And it just transitions naturally in this role. I wasn't expecting, especially as a
Mhm.
young police officer, to think one day I'm going to be a chief, I'm going to be responsible for development and training others. It just kind of happened organically throughout my career. And I think it aligned nicely with my personal traits that of helping others and actually wanting to teach.
Well, and I will say, having experience teaching some high school students, I think they're the scariest. Like, they are the most intimidating. I said I'd much rather talk to a bunch of cops in a room than you
Amen.
guys, and they didn't even laugh. So again, they were very scary. But yeah, I mean, kind of what you were speaking to, as your responsibilities grew, and from investigations to supervisor to commander and now chief. How has your leadership style evolved? While I think I agree, Gary, maintaining that level of empathy, but how has your leadership style evolved over the years?
Say early on, especially as a sergeant, my leadership style was like very hands on. I was focused on making sure tasks were done. If my superior told me, hey, I need X, Y, and Z, or I need to hit this marker for, our stat purposes, or we need to combat crime over here, I was very hands on and seeing it happen. As my responsibilities have grown and as I've advanced through the ranks, I've had to learn to take a step back and to allow others to lead and kind of take that role. That's probably one of my weaknesses. I tell folks is because I still like to be very hands on. I love this profession. I love officers. And so I want to be engaged at the line level. But my leadership style has changed where I've learned the art of delegation and the art of developing others to take my role and to take my place one day, and not having to control everything per se. I've also, as I've gotten older, been more intentional with my communication
Mhm.
and also more patient in my approach. Back in the day, you did what the sergeant said, no questions asked. And so learning what I call transitional leadership, and especially with the different age groups that we have, and changing my leadership style to fit or to answer their questions is really how I've changed grown as a leader.
We're seeing that you speak to in Gary, as you know, and the research that data that we've gathered, the culture has shifted and the folks coming into public safety, those younger folks particularly, are looking at the culture, right?
Mhm.
And they want to know, how are you going to support me when, not if, these critical incidents happen? And you know that firsthand. And are you seeing at Brevard, do you get a lot of the younger folks? Are you getting more seasoned officers?
So we Brevard was facing a staffing shortage when I got here. And so what I've encountered is I have senior, very well versed veteran officers, and then I have a younger crowd. So I'm missing that kind of
Yeah.
that middle
Mm.
gap of experience. And one of the big things that I did when I got here in the first month and a half was have one-on-ones with everybody. And I wanted to learn very specifically what their goals were in law enforcement, what their goals were personally as well as professionally, and what we can do as a department. And so I kind of interviewed them as to what do they expect from me, and then what can I do and my ideas for them. And so I like having kind of like a plan of action for each officer. And I have found that it's been very receptive, especially to the younger crowd when they feel that they have a chief that's interested in investing in them,
Right.
both personally
Mhm.
and professionally. I think that has been received very well here.
That's such an innovative approach. Gary?
I'm intrigued. Yeah, I'm intrigued if you, through those conversations and that question of what are you expecting from me or as your chief, did you hear anything that surprised you? Did anything? Yeah. I'm just kind of curious how it struck you. The items you were hearing from them.
A lot of the feedback that I found surprising, and I think it's a difference in leadership approach, was they expect me to be present all the time. They expect me to be visible and accessible. And that's always been a leadership approach for me. You have to be visible, you have to be present. And I think in possibly in prior administrations that had been something maybe missing from this department. So it was surprising to hear officers hungry to see their chief. Back in the day, I tried to avoid the ivory tower. I liked evening watch because the chief and them went home at 5. And so it was kind of refreshing to hear officers that want their chief to be present. They want that guidance, they want that structure. And so I think that was probably the most surprising thing for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've heard through these podcasts now a pretty consistent message of things are changing, expectations are changing, the cultures are changing, and that fits right in with that. But I don't know that I've heard that very particular idea, but it makes perfect sense, right? A visible, connected chief is going to understand the culture better. They're going to build those relationships. They're gonna have empathy for their officers. They're gonna understand the environment as it's playing out in real time and whatnot. That's an interesting idea and observation, but certainly it's such a basic thing, but it's such a different thing.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Well, I want to switch gears just a little bit, seeing that we're women. So, Gary, this is not about you, but for women who rise in leadership and particularly in a male dominant industry, there are often, moments where I'm sure you realize that you have to use your voice in ways that, others may not have to, right? So, can you recall a time in your career where you had to really advocate for yourself or moments where you realized no one else was going to do that for you?
I would say that advocating for opportunities where, I was one of the first 2 females to make the Henry County SWAT team. Advocating for not lowering standards, not reducing, the 200-pound dummy carry and the runs and the times. And so it's a little bit of still feeling to have to prove yourself, but also advocate for the same standards. So you do have that credibility. So when you do earn that SWAT pin or you do get selected for that school, you just have to step up and speak for yourself and then demonstrate that you can do it. And that's the best way I found that helped me out throughout my career.
I think that's phenomenal. I mean, looking back, it's always that cliche. It's, what advice would you give your younger self at the very start of your career? Or would you do it all the same?
I think I would tell myself not to be as hard on myself. I felt very early on the pressure of one, I was a very young female. I looked like I was 12 years old. And, I got a lot of explorer jokes. And so I felt this constant need to prove myself or to come off stronger or meaner, harder than I was as a person. When I realized midway through my career, I'm more successful just by being who I am as opposed to trying to prove myself consistently. And I found that with the ways that you treat not only the community members, but also with the officers. It's much more received as opposed to trying too hard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That shifted probably your leadership style, right? Being younger and being, moving up the ranks and yeah, feeling like you had to have more of a command presence. But I think that's amazing that you have learned and are continuing to learn just to be yourself, want to hear from others so that you can better lead them as individuals. So I think that's amazing. Gary, do you have any additional thoughts about that?
I was really intrigued by the idea that you had this uh, preconceived idea of how you were supposed to show up, and you put energy and effort behind that, which was had to be draining and difficult because you were role playing, really. And
Yes.
then as you started to enjoy some success, or you were experiencing different environments, to be able to take away that pressure and actually just be yourself had to be both freeing and liberating, I would think.
It was more so learning to really just trust my instincts and be who I was, trust my instincts and know that, um, a little bit of the emotional intelligence too on how to act and interact and, less react, and it was very freeing for lack of better words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Protect that your authenticity even
Yes.
while navigating other people's expectations. Have you had additional leadership training? I know that you've been a part of with, women in law enforcement and have you gone to the command college or where have you learned, and developed some of that emotional intelligence and other leadership skills?
Yes, ma'am. So, Georgia does it very well. So when you become, like a line level supervisor, you have supervision and leadership one, two, and three. And those are state, Georgia post approved classes that you take at the public training center. And so that was kind of like a good classroom basis that gave me a foundation for being a sergeant and then obviously on the job training. And then they have management one, two, and three when you hit lieutenant level. And so having that structured training standardized across the state was extremely beneficial. I did attend Georgia's Command College, which also allowed me to earn my master's degree in public administration. And again, being along with SPI, but being in the same room with senior leaders in law enforcement and having that network, learning those experiences, what worked and didn't work for them. You take bits and pieces of what they can bring to the table, and that affects your leadership style. Um, and then ultimately, I would say one of the best things that has ever happened to me that has made me probably a better leader is becoming a mother. Having children and learning the patience and the empathy and the struggles that other, as a young female sergeant, I don't have kids. I didn't understand sometimes what officers were facing with families and that until I had one of my own. And so that definitely having children has made me a stronger and better leader, in my opinion.
Agree. And what is that saying that you don't get that child, that idea, the idea you have in your mind, that's not typically the child that is you're blessed with. It's the one that's put on this earth to teach you something about yourself and firsthand knowledge. I know that mine has taught me some things that I really need to work on. And so yes, I do. I think it develops us as individuals, as parents, but also leaders and kind of speaking to that, it's something that came up in the advisory board meeting of for the western part of the state, which not to put you on the spot, but we'd love to have your insight. And is that developing, and because you have that gap, one of the challenges that they're seeing is like we've got these senior officers. A lot of them are about to go out the door, and yet we have these very young, and they're not ready. So, is that something? It sounds like you're probably faced with that same challenge, and if so, how are you developing them kind of at hyper speed?
Right. So I am. I'm actually, it's funny you say that because I have one that just dropped retirement paperwork and I was like, great,
Yeah.
Um, and then I have some very young, capable officers with 2, maybe 3 years experience in their belt. And so we just recently posted for sergeant's positions. I have 3 sergeant vacancies. And one of my young officers came and says, "Oh, I really want to put in for sergeant, but I've only got 2 years." We sat down and we had a heart to heart. And I told her very specifically, yes, you meet the minimum qualification because we had to lower our qualification for years of experience to try to fill these ranks. But I also feel like you're doing yourself a disservice. So young in your career, we have investigations, we have canine, we have other areas of opportunities where I want you to grow and develop and learn those experiences because they will better help you as a sergeant. And so I still have them put in for training they find interesting that will benefit the department. But with her still being very driven to become a sergeant, I said, well, let's shift our focus then from traffic enforcement and let's start looking at a little bit of leadership schools and some management and what we can do in the area as well as online that can help develop you. And then it also becomes looking at placement with what lieutenants do I have? How does their personalities fit with this individual? Because I want to be very intentional on who I pair them with for that guidance and mentorship. And so that's the approach I've been looking at now is really having the heart to hearts. We opened our sergeants externally. I don't necessarily believe in going external for such a low rank, but we have that huge gap in experience. And so looking forward to bringing it in. And again, the decision was hers to put in and she did. And I said, Roger that. Let's start getting you ready for these steps.
That's great, and I was gonna ask, when is it that you go, "Oh, maybe we should put it outside," which you're right, most of the time I see it as more in, like, an assistant chief or sometimes a captain position or major, but yeah, if anything you learned, you had exposure and opportunities in so many different areas, and being able to say that to her while also still and being encouraging, and you'll get here, but it's just gonna take a little bit more time, and then as a leader, you still have a need. You've gotta fit that gap. So, Gary, do you have any thoughts around that as far as kind of what we're seeing in those trends and gaps?
Yeah, and to your point earlier, Elizabeth, around the knowledge gap that's potentially leaving these agencies, right? It does seem to me that structured mentoring, an intentional transfer protocol, right, inside of agencies is just going to be absolutely critical because these officers that have been on the job for decades just know so much, right? They know so much about the communities they serve, the individuals. They understand both the art and the science of policing in ways that just require some time. So it's interesting to hear how, in this very specific example, you were able um, to paint that picture and create sort of a framework for her to start to experience it. I'm wondering, on a bigger level, is that a challenge that the agency and are you trying to develop some sort of a more formal, intentional structure around that, or what can you do as a chief to help facilitate that?
Even the state, like, I was
Yeah.
gonna say, you had that experience, I guess,
Oh,
those
in Georgia.
in-service training with Georgia. Is there something yes, Gary, is there something she's doing internally, but then also smaller agency budget, but do you have some recommendations with some of our commission leaders or secretary, to say, "Hey, have y'all thought about this to help us with these issues?"
So I do have a connection from Apex through Mayor Gilbert, who's assigned to the commission. I haven't spoken to him directly about it, but we have talked at my time at Apex about the need for what I call kind of like a how-to guide for every rank. So when I was a sergeant in Henry County, and Henry County is about 300 square miles just south of Atlanta, and I got promoted the day one, they hand me a badge and say, okay, you're a sergeant. And I was like, well, that's wonderful. I don't like, what do I do? How do I do this?
SOP on that.
Exactly, and it was kinda trial by fire, and so when I became a lieutenant, seeing that deficiency, I created a field training guide that is very similar to an officer's field training, but for a sergeant, where they're paired up. It was 4 weeks instead of the 12 weeks. It followed the San Jose model, but we did it for supervisors, and this is how you handle certain things in Henry County. This is how we do use of force reports. This is how we do vehicle pursuits. This is how you handle when somebody has been out. This is what policy says at this level and what your responsibilities and expectations are as a sergeant. And so I had that developed for sergeant and then also for the rank of lieutenant. And so I've kind of had those guidebooks and I've been able to tweak them with every agency I've gone to try to prepare the supervisors under me or to have that book as to what should I do in this situation. And it's kind of like a how-to guide. So I think that is something that is very beneficial, especially with smaller departments. And as we're working on our accreditation, I'm on the state's NC Lean email system where different accreditation specialists are asking for policies or, hey, does anybody have this? And I was like, it's such a wonderful network. So I know departments throughout the state are already trying to build guides or guidelines, SOPs, for leadership development and roles. And so I think I'm not on any boards yet, but having a foothold on, the North Carolina Chiefs of Police Association or something to try to implement a standardization across the board for general leadership would be a phenomenal place to start. And I know we're kind of already doing it on the granular level between departments, but having it statewide would be.
Yeah, and I know, well, of course, you're familiar with the NC League of Municipalities and definitely what you were speaking about, with the Chiefs Association. I I can't speak clearly about it. However, I know Director Hulling said, and some of those initiatives they've had to put together, kind of best practices for certain things. I mean, that's a little bit higher level. I don't know if they get real granular with, again, like we're talking about the how-to guides, but it's needed. And I don't know. I could see you with training. I mean, those are the things like I'd sit in so many and it's wonderful and the debriefings and you'll learn from each other. And sometimes it's like these basic, like tactical, approaches to really running a business almost. You are running a business. And I don't know. I think it would be really great to see you present on some of the things and those experiences and what you've put together because we learn best from one another, right? And
Yes.
that's what I love so much about what we do and the 21 years that I've been in this and learning from leaders like yourself and really just kind of being the connector. It's like I'm not in law enforcement, but I know and I've seen this works well and this has worked here. And I would call you and say, hey, Chief, are you good with me sharing this? Because they're really struggling. And I think that's what it
Yes.
takes for us all to get.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. And it was refreshing. I hadn't even arrived in Brevard yet. Chief Boykin and Woodfin and Chief Oberman and Waynesville, they were like, hey, we'd love to meet with you. You're coming from Wake County. Policing is a little different in Western North Carolina. Like, let's give you some pointers. And so they're already taking what they've learned from their roles out here. And they made an appreciative, overt effort to meet. And it was just welcoming. It was so refreshing too, because you're not alone in this. You all have very similar goals and how we can help one another and what works and what doesn't work.
Well, and you're right, especially coming from the same more, central North Carolina out to the western part. And I will say she is one of my favorites. So, and
She's amazing.
she is. And being an NA grad too, and having that experience and that network, which, maybe you'll get an opportunity to do that as well. It's kind of hard when you're leading the ship and also you still want to continue to develop, but you have her as a neighbor and but yeah, please tell her I said hello. And Gary, before we wrap up, are there any thoughts or questions that you have? I know we went a little bit sideways, but I think this is very helpful to our audience and hearing about all the things that she's implemented and that they can ask her and apply this.
Yeah, so we started this or you mentioned just then, one of the things that we really try to do is be a connector of ideas and people and share things that are working or ideas that people are having. And I was so intrigued by the Georgia experience. I was not familiar with the rigor and the protocols that they had for their development of officers and leaders inside of agencies. So I thought that was a great sort of segue or path to pursue. But as we do wrap up, I'm curious if there's, you mentioned for yourself you would be less hard on yourself going back today, or you would tell yourself that. Are there other nuggets that you would give to sort of emerging leaders in the world of policing today?
I would tell that, leadership is not about the actual position and the rank that you hold. The rank is a title, but it's the standard that you set every day. So I would tell new leaders, make sure you're consistent and intentional in your actions. Make sure you do what you say you're going to do to build that credibility with your troops. As a supervisor, as a chief, you set the example every day that you want people to follow. I would say it, be consistent, be accountable, and more importantly, just be you. Do you as a leader. Uh, would
Yeah, I
be
think
my
that's great.
focus.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
a phenomenal statement towards the end of this, and, yeah, that's what I heard throughout and hearing your story is that authenticity and being open to growing and developing yourself, and Chief Wentzell, just thank you so much for your leadership. This has just been a really cool conversation and learning your story, and just appreciate your candor, and sharing your perspective with us, and at the end of the day, public safety isn't just about policies or procedures. I mean, we're talking about some of that, but it's about people and, the people who step forward to lead, like yourself, and the people who serve their communities and the people who support them along the way. Conversations like this remind us that leadership in this profession continues to evolve and has to, and that
Yes.
thoughtful leaders like you are helping shape what comes next. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. No, I appreciate this opportunity. This has been wonderful.
And to our listeners, thank you for spending time with us on Mind Matters. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, share it with a colleague or someone developing as a leader in your agency. And until next time, take care of yourselves and the people that you lead. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Mind Matters. Please give us your thoughts, and if you like this episode, feel free to share it with others. You can also find more content and choose to follow us on our Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at the FMRT Group. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Mind Matters.